So we're going to talk about a few different things. This is broken up into 3 components. The middle one is definitely the largest. I'll get on my soapbox for a little bit and talk about the impact of attack path management over the last year. We'll talk about the things that we put into the product and kind of some fun stories, war stories, and then kind of give you a preview of where we're going to go in 2025. All right, so last year I got on the stage and talked about attack path mapping, about how it's this continuous process to discover and prioritize removing attack path choke points. And we talked about how we came up with this category of attack path management, and there was a lot of people who were also talking about attack paths, and it was like a really hot topic. We talked about how this was we saw this as the missing component in everybody's identity risk picture. Turns out we kind of underthought that problem a little bit. If you look at it from Gartner's perspective, there's a lot of stuff that you can buy and put in your environments, and a lot of things that I can maybe start to understand. I only know how we get through them. Now, another thing that's happened the last year, everybody's an identity security company. If you ask, Gartner even kind of pokes fun at this. There's all these different vendors saying now they're an identity security company, and they all have different answers in how they solve that problem. And you might be confused, so is Gartner. And they basically tell you, well, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Fortunately, that's really easy for us to state, because we've been identifying this problem for close to a decade now. Attack paths are how we attack identities. It doesn't matter if they're human or machine identity. We use all identities to compromise resources and take over environments. It's how other people may look at the problem like this, where we give discrete access to individual users. And it's how we look at the problem like this. And everybody in this room understands it's not the access that I have today, it's what I can get to in the future. So very simply, this is how we reduce identity risk for customers. And Gartner's getting there. We saw this very recently from them. Detect and manage unknown privilege, analyze complex relationships, and Andy's favorite, implement least privilege. How? Another thing that we saw was, in Microsoft's digital defense report, they actually specifically call out attack path management, something that Andy, authored around in 2021. So pretty proud of the impact that we're having in the industry. Now, we've seen customers operationalize this in a couple different ways. You can certainly go to BloodHound Enterprise, pull out findings, address them, and rinse and repeat. But you can also hook them up to different things like your SIMs or your SOARs with our built-in integrations, or people have hooked this up themselves. I remember one of our customers' first year, they hooked up to Demisto, or the artist formerly known as Demisto, into Cortex. And we're churning out a lot more integrations this year. We just released Splunk SOAR 2 weeks ago, so a lot more to follow there. But this can get as deep and as complex as you want it to get. So there's a lot of different teams that interact with BloodHound data, your internal red teams, vulnerability management teams, identity teams. There's a whole process that we can follow and start ripping apart these privileges and actually securing environments. And we do this because it's effective. So we've seen this, and this is really cool to see over time, like the food and beverage company that has around 2 million identities, who was able to rip out 54% of those problems in 6 months. That's kind of flabbergasting to us when we first found that. Or the bank that's over 100 years old, has over 100,000 employees and has 50 plus domains. They removed all their tier 0, all the original tier 0 attack paths in 6 months, which was just, I had to have them repeat that to me because I didn't believe them. And then the big healthcare organization with 4 million identities, who's removed 90% of their attack paths in 18 months. And it's important because, yes, we're securing our environments, we're making business operations flow, but like this has real world impact. More than just like it's stressful and incidents are never good to go through. But this disrupts like children's hospitals. Like we have a bunch of them as customers. I can't name them obviously, but it makes you feel good that we're like having this kind of impact. And it's just year over year, we see it like increase over time. And last year at Black Hat, we had a customer who came up and they're involved in the healthcare industry, and they showed me this study that actually showed that ransomware has a very direct impact on like death, honestly. So I feel pretty good about this. I mean, my kids asked me like, Dad, what do you do? And I was like, well, we fight bad guys. Like, and everybody, we're all in this, together, and we should be proud of what we do. I know we are, and we're proud to serve all of our customers and our open source users. All right, I'm done with my soapbox. Let's talk about what we built and some fun war stories. So you guys have seen this a couple times now, probably over the last couple days. Our original graph looked very simple, and Jared and Will showed this early on and about how that evolved over time. Today we look something like this, where we have 36 nodes connected by 121 edges. And a different way of thinking about that is we have a lot of ways to make this happen, right? Node connects to node through different opportunities. Now, we're particularly concerned about these types of relationships, or what we call attack paths, where we can take one person's access in the environment and turn it into wrecking the environment. So attack paths are the unique routes or the individual routes that are created through relationships that connect across identities. Those create findings that we can find in BloodHound Enterprise against our critical resources, tier 0 being what we do today. And those are within environments, on-prem or the cloud. Now, there's a lot of them. And to try to articulate this, we've never been able to do this before. But if you were to count all the individual attack paths that you see on this screen, we'd start here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, why does that matter? Well, we can now calculate that, or we quantify that in BloodHound Enterprise now. So we're counting the unique routes to critical resources in BloodHound Enterprise, and we're doing that in our new security posture view. So this the page that Andy and I created a few years ago has been trashed for good reason, and we actually have a UX person and a full UI team that put this together, along with visibility over resolved findings, which our customers were understandably demanding for quite some time. Now, the interesting thing when we did that was we could see how big environments would scale and how their attack paths would just balloon. We always knew that this was going to be a problem, right? We used the map of the United States for a reason as an analogy, but we didn't know how many attack paths there would be. And so when we started doing this, like, let's just start with a 5,000 employee identity, or 5,000 identities, not employees. This could be like 1,000 or 2,000 employees, right? You have machine identities, service principals, whatever. 5 million attack paths. That's a lot of problems. And that 5 million attack paths, right? So that's 5,000 employees. This gets worse, obviously, the bigger you get. So if you're at 40,000 identities, you're around 750 million attack paths. So obviously, we're not going to fix those one by one. And we have 151 billion of those problems across our entire customer data set, which is pretty crazy. Now, not to, like, again, that's why we use this analogy. The map of the United States is probably tired of us, of hearing this from us, right? Like, attack paths are kind of like routes across the United States. It's billions of routes through roads connecting cities to Manhattan. We've used this over time, but it's the same as the red statement below. It's the billions of attack paths created by relationships across identities to critical resources. And it honestly is just an easy thing to explain. If somebody doesn't know what BloodHound is, it's like that. So we have this huge amount of attack paths. And again, let's focus on this simple example. So we have 16. Now, I wouldn't show you billions of attack paths if I couldn't solve the problem. So that's why we created choke points. So choke points are where the concentrations of privileges, where we can remove the threat of all of those attack paths with a single fix. And that's what we do in our new attack paths view. So this is another release that we did this year. It shows not like better highlights the attack paths. It also calculates the amount of attack paths that you are removing when you cut that choke point. So we can do things like this. If you cut that choke point, you remove 8 attack paths, and 13, and 16. So customers or people just saying like, what impact are we having in the environment, or what is the problem we're solving? We can quantify that impact, which is pretty cool. And if you were to take this across scale, like how many findings we have across how many attack paths we model, one attack path or one choke point cuts 300,000 attack paths, which is pretty crazy. Now, the second follow-on to that is, well, how many attack paths or how many findings do we have, and how long would it take me to address those findings? Well, here's a trial that we had in January, and they took down 19,000 findings in a 30-day period. So we've proven that if we can identify the problem for people, they will take action and take action fast. And this isn't 19,000 individual configurations they're doing by hand. This is one configuration. I think this was like like a domain join account that had write account restrictions over every object. And it was like one fix and all this went away. Another thing that we did this year is we've always looked at the problem from the left-hand side of the target node. So what we call the exposure, or the attack paths into somebody like Jane. So how many people can use different routes to get to Jane's account? But we've always wanted to do this side of it. So what could you do with Jane's account once you took over it? Now, if you're getting to a tier 0 account, that's kind of irrelevant, right? If you get to a domain admin, you can do whatever you want. But there's other cases why we really want to know this. What about curb roastable users? So curb roastable users, anybody can request the ticket and start cracking that. But what you're concerned about is how far they can go. And we've had ways to do this in the past where we found the most admin rights or something like this, but we haven't gone as deep as we do today, analyze every possible abusable relationship outbound from a target node. And so in this case, we have a curb roastable user account. They had a few of them that they needed to resolve. This one, enterprise admins, password last set in 2003. Pretty sure they're going to crack that password pretty quickly. So we have this like dual-sided picture of exposure and impact, and we can measure each one of them for every finding. At this time last year, we were doing this at the attack path category level. Now we're doing it at the finding level. So this is really important when you have tier 0 logons, right? Like if your domain admins are logging on to random hosts, where should you target first to resolve that? How about the system that has domain users logged into, or as a local admin, right? So they log on to that one minefield of a computer, and that just blows up the risk picture. So we've been really focused on calculating the impact, or calculating the total number of attack paths you can remove, and trying to prioritize the finding that you should start with first. All right, Active Directory Certificate Services. We released this last year after a long time of beating our head against a problem. Will and Lee released this in 2021. Our intent was to actually have this ship with BloodHound Enterprise, but it was complex, to say the least. Last year, there's a bunch of escalation techniques in ADCS. Let's just focus on one, Escalation 1, which allows basically a one-shot to enterprise admins. And we're just going to focus on the critical ones, which is anywhere everyone or authenticated users has the ability to escalate directly to enterprise admins. And last year, around this time, there was 16% of accounts had that specific configuration in. That's horrific. So again, there's multiple ways you can use ADCS, but this is the most critical Escalation 1 examples. Today, 65% of those have been remediated, and they now make about 5% of all environments. And that's after doubling customers. So we now cover more customers. So we've actually identified and remediated even more in that time frame. Let's talk about hybrid paths. So hybrid attack paths we introduced in the summer. It's something that we've wanted to do ever since we had coverage for Azure. We always knew we had this problem with Active Directory, and we had problems in Azure, and what would happen if you connected the two together and you connected authenticated users in an on-prem standpoint to a global administrator in Azure. And we have seen some things, and it's my opinion that Active Directory is Azure's biggest security problem. There's not much you can do about that. You can't like rip apart your hybrid environment. I'm not saying you should do that, but it's very obvious that, you know, Azure configurations, you can mess those up too, for sure, but connecting them to Active Directory exposes you to all the worst of both problems. So we saw things like global administrator, like you'd have a user who would have a global administrator, right? And in most Azure environments, we saw relatively low tier 0 exposure. And as soon as you hook that up to Active Directory, it spiked immediately. And we'd have attack paths from these massive groups traversing up into Azure. Sometimes these paths can get really long. So here's an example that we found in one environment that crosses 3 different domain trusts here on the left side. We go up to Entra once to escalate some privilege, go back down into Active Directory one more time to take over an account, and eventually take over global admin in the Azure tenant. So they can get really complex. Along with the on-prem to Azure attacks, we've also seen cross-tenant attack paths. And if you can't see this, to make it a little bit easier for you, on the bottom left, you're seeing an Active Directory environment that crosses into an Azure tenant, but then has a service principal or an application that runs in another tenant. And I think this is something that we're really focused on or scared about, to be quite honest, going forward. There's a lot of interesting trusts that you can introduce in an Azure environment, and a lot of ones that you can do without being an admin. So you could trust a service principal as a developer, and that introduces you to the risk of like a GitHub organization, for example. And gone are the days in the Active Directory environment, like if you had to be a domain admin, right, to create that trust relationship to another domain. That doesn't exist in Azure. There's different ways you can connect IDPs that honestly the administrators don't really understand. And it creates problems like this. We talked about this early last year too with the Midnight Blizzard attack. This is exactly what Andy briefed when Russia took over the environment over there. Now, an interesting hybrid attack path that we saw last year was this one. This was not necessarily on-prem to cloud. Well, it was, but it was just private cloud. So this was down into VMware. So this was a funny story about if you renamed a group called ESX admins, VMware was like, yep, you're an admin. And that's all it took. Does anybody remember that from last year? Everybody was like, what, why? So basically, I could be a user in Active Directory, rename a group or join a group or get access to that group, and then basically control the VMware cluster. And where do people usually store their DCs? In VMware. So everybody's an admin all of a sudden. Now we have everybody that basically has physical access to the DC. And while people might have had a small group or a small number of people in that group, let's say 5 to 10, that might be reasonable. The unrolled group membership or the attack paths to that group were astronomical. That little circle you see there is the ESX admins group, but that unrolled is the paths to get to that group. So your admins, looking at it from the perspective of who is an admin now was the wrong approach, right? We had to understand this entire picture. And then here's a super bad example. And like last year, I showed examples of like, if you look at these graphs long enough, you start to see things. So I'll just show you what popped in my head. Anybody ever remember this from The Last Jedi? We're all ESX admins. And that's your least privilege, just crumbling. Okay, NTLM and BloodHound. I'm not going to redo the whole talk, but honestly, I'm just really excited to flip this around. If we're going to talk about a technology from the 90s and how we're modeling it, I'm going to give it to you in the form of a 4x3 slide that's been over-designed. So NTLM and BloodHound, it's relatively new. But what we've already seen in customer environments is the average exposure, basically it spikes a somewhat secure environment immediately to nearly 100% exposed. And that's because authenticated users can coerce and relay that attack. So it makes sense. It's kind of terrible to see. And here's another example. Here's what's happened. That's a 250 million attack path increase because of like 30 NTLM relay attack edges. It's pretty insane. Again, the positive news is we can show you how to fix it. So I'm not just giving you problems, but it is kind of fun to look at. And this isn't a new problem. We've been able to do this for quite some time. We're excited to actually action the problem. It's not just disable NTLM across your domain, because you can't do that. You all have legacy systems in your environments. I'm not going to tell you to cripple your environment just to make it more secure. We can get really specific on the host, tell you the protocols to address or the host to address, and not just say to disable it domain-wide. So it actually affects the problem. We've seen it really impacting customers on the consulting side. We're excited to bring that back into BloodHound and do it at scale. All right. Not every improvement we make to the graph is like a flashy hybrid or ADCS or NTLM or something like that. Sometimes it's the relatively small things, and it can, core value at SpectreOps is continuous improvement. Consistent. See, this is why we have Jason here. It's consistent improvement. We've modeled unconstrained delegation for quite some time, but we improved that last year by introducing the coerce to TGT edge. It just made it a lot easier to understand and allowed our open source users to identify this a lot better. And if you look on the right side, this is the headache that Chris Thompson went through, who is there. Thanks, buddy. That looks complex, and I'm glad I didn't have to do it. But that's the work that went into the ownership edge. The ownership edge is almost a ubiquitous problem for people when they first deploy. We always find somebody who owns a DC who shouldn't. And Microsoft improved that, but there are still a lot of problems with some of the specific ways you can configure ownership rights or maintain ownership over an object. And so we went through a whole lot of work to model all that out and basically maintain the accuracy of the graph. And we've had a lot of community contributions. I will say that we are trying to action these faster and faster every day. We've been adding engineers. We doubled our engineering team in 2013. We're doing it. We did it again last year. We'll do it again this year. And a lot of that is to provide features back into the product. It's also to action community feedback. So things like this, bringing in right GP link attack paths into the product. This was directly from a community member, and it's awesome. We want to do this a lot more. I know there's a whole lot of PRs that people want to see pulled in. I've been pulled into conversations yesterday for exactly that. I promise we will get to them. And so we have all these attack paths everywhere. And one of the guys on our team and his team behind him have to deal with this problem. This is John Hopper, our head of engineering. Now he has a whole team, and John would say he doesn't do the work. But this is what they've been doing to deal with that scale. So you've probably been seeing this if you've seen our contributions on the open source side, kind of seeing where we're going. If you do a pathfinding or cipher or object search, what happens on the back end is it gets put through a middleware that we call database agnostic wrapper for graphs, or DOGs. And yes, we will make everything named a DOG reference if we can. That translates into two different outputs on our end. One will go to Neo4j and one will go to a SQL statement. So we can put that in Postgres. We are transitioning, the bulk of our customer fleets are on Postgres. We put 3 years into that transition for reasons that you can ask me later. Postgres allows us to scale much more rapidly, and we're still addressing some of the gaps in Cypher from Neo4j Cypher to our OpenCypher spec. But we're rapidly closing those. We're pretty excited about this. We've seen a huge improvement in analysis times across BloodHound Enterprise customers and just faster speed overall. We can ingest data faster. We can drop data faster. We just do everything faster, honestly. Now, everybody will ask us, are we getting rid of Neo4j? And yes, eventually we will, but I'm not saying we're doing that right now. And the more important thing is you shouldn't have to care. So it doesn't matter if you use Neo4j or Postgres, you'll always be able to use Cypher. It's a really handy way of interacting with graph data. We could expose SQL as well. This is something that we're talking about right now. More importantly, though, we'll communicate this well in advance. There's a reason why we haven't set a date. It's because we're not charging toward that date right now. It will happen. We'll communicate it, and we'll do it. We'll beat the drum loudly. So you have plenty of time to move off or shift gears if you need to. But for right now, you can continue to use Neo4j if you would like to. We think you should move to Postgres for reasons that I can expand on later if you're curious. And there's a ton of other enhancements that we put in. So both on the internal side and on the community side, we pulled in a lot of PRs this year. Pretty excited about all of them. I can't talk about every one of them, even though I want to. I mean, dark mode, you probably noticed that I haven't pulled up a single screenshot that's been dark mode. So I have my own preference, but Rohan, thank you, though. I know I'm the minority in that. All right, I'm going to invite Megan up here, who's going to talk way more intelligently about FedRAMP.
Thank you, sir. All right, well, as Justin mentioned, my name is Megan, and I'm from the Palantir FedStart program, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk about how SpectropOps got BloodHound Enterprise FedRAMP High authorized this year, which is a very, very big thing. Oh, thank you so much. But before we get into the details there, let's just take a big step back. So what is FedRAMP? Well, it's a standardized approach that allows cloud service providers to be able to work with our US government, and they can securely bring their technologies and applications to the government after you meet a series of controls. And these controls are based off of our government's NIST guidelines, which covers everything from operational to organizational, and of course, the application level security. And the number of controls that cloud service providers have to meet is largely dependent on the impact level that you are interested in pursuing. So low, medium, or high, with FedRAMP High specifically accounting for the government's most sensitive, unclassified data in cloud environments. And FedRAMP authorization is a hard requirement for any cloud service provider that wants to work with the government. And especially at that FedRAMP high level, this can be very, very time and resource intensive. It can take years to find that agency sponsorship, engineer all of your infrastructure and applications to meet all of those NIST controls, actually prove the compliance, and then receive your authorization from the government. In fact, for Palantir, it took 5 years, implementation of over 700 security controls and 25 different teams for us to get our own FedRAMP High authorization. And it's because of all of these challenges that inspired the creation of our FedStart program. And the idea is that we want to help other cloud service providers be able to work with the government a lot faster and with fewer hurdles than a native authorization. So at a very, very high level, our FedStart, FedRAMP partners come to us and deploy their applications, so in this case, BHE, into Palantir's secure and pre-authorized infrastructure, which allows them to inherit roughly 80% of the required NIST controls that you need for that FedRAMP high level. And then after each of these organizations are able to meet the remaining 20% and go through a third-party audit, we directly include them into our already authorized package, which allows them and these other cloud service providers to work with the government on the scale of months rather than years. And because we directly include all of these partners into our package, we take security very, very, very seriously. And so none of this would have been possible without our very first FedStart partner, SpectropOps. And as mentioned, we are a very security-minded company, so it just made sense to see another security-minded organization be our very first FedStart partner as we took this journey to FedRAMP High together. So how did SpectropOps get BloodHound Enterprise FedRAMP High authorized? A little bit of a tongue twister there. But first, we deployed BloodHound Enterprise into Palantir's secured infrastructure, and this included our hardened Kubernetes environment. And once deployed, BHE was able to inherit roughly that 80% of those required NIST controls for that FedRAMP high level. And concurrently, we worked with the SpectraOps team to help them meet that remaining 20% of NIST controls that tend to be more specific to the organization and the application. So this spanned everything from additional security controls to plenty of paperwork. And then SpectraOps was ready for the third-party audit. So we submitted all of the compliance evidence as well as the FedRAMP hardened version of BloodHound Enterprise to our third-party auditors who verified all of the implementation of the NIST controls and application security through things like pen tests and system vulnerability reviews. And once the audit concluded, we passed those results, and I'm happy to say SpectraOps passed on the first try to the FedRAMP PMO for review. And upon approval of those successful audit results, we formally included BloodHound Enterprise and SpectraOps into Palantir's authorized package, which allowed SpectraOps to be FedRAMP High authorized officially. And if you go on the public FedRAMP Marketplace website today, you'll be able to find SpectraOps and BloodHound Enterprise listed alongside Palantir's authorized services at that FedRAMP High level. Now, SpectraOps didn't stop there. The team moved very fast, and by the end of 2024, already had a civil agency ready to grant authorization of the use of BloodHound Enterprise within the agency itself. Certainly a huge, huge achievement. And even though, these 5 steps are a very high-level summary of the full FedRAMP High authorization process, SpectraOps was able to do this in roughly about a year, which may sound like a long time, but I'd like to remind you it took Palantir 5 years to do this. And this was due to all of the hard work from both of the teams, but also as our very first FedStart partner, we do really appreciate the resilience and adaptability from the SpectraOps team as we all navigated unknown unknowns and all the live changes to the FedRAMP process to be able to get to this point today. And it's because of SpectraOps piloting our program that we were able to iron out a lot of those wrinkles, develop better resources and workflows for our FedStart process that makes me happy to say today, a lot of our partners are able to do this in less than 6 months. And in fact, in 2025, we've already had 1 partner able to do it in 3 months and 2 more that are trending towards even shorter time than that. Again, another significant decrease from Palantir's 5 years and SpectraOps' already impressive year. And again, to keep this short, we are so grateful to SpectraOps for being our very first FedStart partner to be able to get to this point today. So with that, it's my pleasure to pass it back to Justin to talk about how the FedRAMP High authorization has really brought BloodHound Enterprise to that next level. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'll take this one. Thank you. Sweet. Yeah, that was a lot of work. And what does it mean, right? So basically, we can support federal agencies. A lot of us come from a DoD background. So it's great to serve enterprise folks, but we want to support our federal agencies as well and give back to where we came from. We also have to support enterprise clients with federal data. So we have customers in both sides of this equation today using our FedRAMP environment. And one more thing. Something that I haven't talked about yet that we've heard since day one of BloodHound Enterprise and since day one of the Community Edition release, and it's the lack of this guy. So if you are a Community Edition user and next month in BloodHound Enterprise, you'll be able to do this. So what you're seeing here is me just execute a query. We pull up Steven's account, and we can scroll down. We can see the memberships that he has, and we can see the outbound object control that he has, and I can explore as deep as I want to go, right? So let's click into the authenticated users group. Let's pull up the membership of that group. But I've just traversed down the rabbit hole. I want to go back. Yeah. And it goes across all the different options here. So we go through search, we'll go through pathfinding, we can look for paths, we can, in this example, we're finding a path from Steven to domain admins. We can go to global administrators and find a path there, pull up the global administrators entity panel, pull up the active assignments and see all of those members. And then again, you're going to see it here in a second, but go back across. And it maintains the state of your entity panel too. So we tried to think through this quite a lot to make sure that the back functions and how you think it should function. This is available, by the way, in the early access tab. If you're a community edition user, just update, click the early access, enable this in your instance, and then you'll be able to use this right away. But it's more than just back button. So this is an example where I've taken a link and shared it to a different browser that I didn't have any history in. And now I'm pulling up that same link. So this is deep linking. It's not just back button. We can actually take a link from something that you're looking at and send that over to your colleague and have them pull out the exact same thing. And again, backwards, we'll go back through every single thing that we went through. And but it also goes forwards. And that might not seem super cool, but honestly, it's pretty great if you find yourself deep through the rabbit hole and you want to go backward or forward and figure out where you wanted to, what you were looking at, and share those results across your team. Again, this is in early access. We want to hear feedback. Is this functioning how you wanted it to? This is more function than the FOSS product had. So FOSS only had back. This one has forward and then shareable links. So hopefully you like it. If you don't, let us know. Let us know how we can improve it. And you can use it today. And I'm sorry that it took us this long. For BloodHound Enterprise customers, you'll see this in a few weeks. There's a little bit more complexity to the enterprise side. There's just more to it. So we could do one step first. We wanted to get that out as fast as possible, get some feedback, and make that enterprise deployment soon. All right, let's talk about some fun things that we're going to be looking at in 2025. I'm not going to give you a comprehensive roadmap, but I'll show you what we're working on right now and when you can see it. This isn't a comprehensive look at everything that we're doing. It's just kind of a couple key features that I think you're going to like. One is if you do something like this in the product today, you're going to get a result that looks like that. So show me all Kerber roastable users. Those don't have relationships. Those are just nodes, and the product's just going to spit out a bunch of objects for you. And you're like, cool, that's useful. I have to like click through each one and figure out like if this is actually useful. Well, wouldn't it be handy if we just had that, right? So we can pull up columns. We can manage all the columns that are on the view. We can drop that to CSV. So I could search for Kerber roastable users. I could search for those with passwords older than 10 years. I could sort them by the privilege they have in the environment, by naming scheme, you name it. So it's really customizable. And again, drop it to CSV, send it out. A lot of people have this with like some people want to just say when are passwords rotated? Finally open a lot of people's eyes when we find like accounts that haven't been rotated in like a decade. And like, well, can we find all of those? And I'm like, sure. But we spit them across as dots, and we can pull that information out of the API and give them some useful information. But this is just going to make it easier for people to access directly for themselves. So feel good about that one. Relatively small. So the takeaway is defenders can think in graphs. Sometimes it's easier to look at that in a list. And so table view is coming this summer. All right, Andy, in an Azure environment, Andy has a role that is global admin, right? So he has global admin today. And if you look in BloodHound, the way that we represent this is the role that you have active at the time of scan. Now, anybody that manages an Azure environment knows that that's kind of not the proper way you should look at this, because one of the key features of Azure is you don't have to persistently grant access or grant a role. That's why you have the role eligible, where I can elevate myself to that role and do it just in time, right? It's a great feature by Microsoft that they introduced in Azure, but we don't model it today. We are working on that right now. We are working on that as soon as NTLM wraps up. So a couple of weeks, we're going to kick that off, and that should be coming as well this summer. So this is going to greatly expand the graph. What we found in early modeling is, yes, sometimes you have to meet additional security controls to grant yourself that role, but sometimes you can just do it yourself, and it's a little more than a speed bump. So it's basically like the equivalent of having a persistent role, and we will be able to show you that. Okay, today, BloodHound Enterprise is focused on tier 0, and we always have been, and the reason why we do this is because If you get access to 0.0, you can do whatever you want, right? But nobody really cares about domain admins. I mean, we here care about domain admins because we know what we can do with it, but nobody at your companies care about domain admins. They care about the stuff in the middle, right? They care about tier one, all the business critical applications and data that they house. They care about all the administrators at the lower level. And that's a huge, huge amount of identities and resources. And you want to organize them logically in your head. Like maybe we have a HIPAA enclave, or maybe we have a PCI enclave. And those are all represented in this tier one bucket. And so this is important in a single IDP or a single environment like Active Directory or Azure, right? People have talked about tiered administration for quite a long time. The interesting thing that we found with hybrid attack paths, this creates, or we are going to solve a different problem. So one, you might have an Active Directory user who's just really low privilege, domain user level rights. And you could have an Intune admin in Entra ID, and you could have an enterprise owner in GitHub. But those are all the same people. They're all linked. They all have SSO. So you've actually crossed your separation of least privilege by crossing the different identities providers, if that makes any sense. And we'll be able to model that for you with multi-tier. So both within the platform or across platform, identify where you're breaking those logical administrative boundaries, and then just, again, show you how to cut those attack paths at scale. And then we always get this question. I think we got it the minute we released BloodHound Enterprises. When are you going to go to fill in the blank, right? So we started with Active Directory. We are going to, we started with, we introduced coverage for Entra ID a couple of years ago. Still have a lot of coverage to build out there. Jared and Will showed a prototype for GitHub. We have early attack path research in AWS, Jira, Snowflake, but there's more, and there's more behind that. And so when are you going to bring it into X? We want BloodHound to be where attack path research is done. So where open source attack path research is done. Last year, we were talking about a team out of Datadog who created KubeHound. And they told us flat out, they tried to put it in BloodHound, but it was so horrifically difficult to do because of the way we architected the product. We're taking steps today to fix that. And hopefully next year, we are where AD attack path research is done, but we're where everything else also can be done. So you don't have to, I went too far. You don't have to understand our schema to make things happen in the graph. You just spit us data, we represent it for you, and you can take action from there. So you don't need to be a Neo4j expert. You don't need to be a Postgres expert. We take care of that for you, and you can do the research you want to do and move on. Until we get there, though, we have a lot of problems to fix, and that's for you, Jason.
All right.
Cool.
I guess we'll wrap her up.
Yeah.
Thanks.